Yeah, just to remind everyone that we're recording for our YouTube channel for All In, and just a reminder if everyone could go on mute if possible, the usual housekeeping for these calls. How is everyone today? It's a bit of a miserable wet one, so we're hoping to have a very enlightening and joyful conversation this morning because it's a miserable day outside. Just give it a couple of seconds for others to join. Brilliant. Well, I think we'll crack on. Thanks so much again to everyone for joining us for what is now Action 8. It's a how-to session for Action 8 in the All In Action Plan. It's really great to see new faces on this call as well. Catherine, could you go on mute, please? Don't know if you can hear me there. But yeah, delighted to have, as ever, a fantastic panel of speakers, and Dan, who's going to be taking us through the data at the top of the call. I'm going to rattle through introductions, then obviously we'll jump into a conversation with everybody, but I'm delighted to have today Kate Williams, she, her, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Publicis Group, Yeme Onabuabe, she, they, who is Associate Director in Student Transition and Outcomes at King's College London, and also a trustee at Mind Out. And Mark Runnicus, he, him, is co-founder and planning partner at Wax On and joint CEO of Advertising, and also a good friend of the AAs. So I'm delighted to have you all join us today. Before we start our conversation, I've got some questions for you all. I'm going to go over to Dan Wilkes. He, him, who's director at Kratos, and is going to take us through just the sort of the raw data as ever from the All In census that we did last March. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. As Sharon said, I'm just going to run you through the key findings in regards to the LGBTQ plus respondents from the All In census in March 2021. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a few slides. Can people see that? Yes?
Yep, I can see it, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So a quick reminder, first of all, of the census. As I say, it was March last year we conducted it. It received over 16,000 responses from right across the advertising industry, so agencies, brands, and media owners. As far as we know, I've looked into this a fair bit. I think it's the largest survey response ever for a diversity and inclusion survey of any industry. It's certainly the largest response of a survey for the advertising industry. And we did some calculations and equated that the time spent with people filling this in equated to around £500,000 of industry time. So I think that's all real, testament to all of the work that a lot of you did in kind of encouraging people to respond, but also how engaged industry were with this survey and these topics, and the desire there to change it and to take action. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ plus representation in the survey. And so this is based on two separate questions. The first one was, how would you describe your sexual orientation, which was bisexual, gay, lesbian, heterosexual, straight, other, or prefer not to answer. And there were just over 1,500 people who identified as bisexual, gay, lesbian, heterosexual, or other, which will be referred to as LGB plus in the slides that are about to follow. And there was a separate question, which was, do you identify as transgender? And we had 40 people who said yes, they did. And that will be referred to as, as trans in the slides that follow. So those questions were corrected of best practice in last year, but we'll be updating those with Stonewall's latest guidance for the coming survey. But it will all still be comparable when we do the 2023 All In census. So in terms of representation, 10% of the industry were LGB plus, which is, it's hard to compare to a UK average because the ONS figure is 3%. but that is kind of acknowledged to be probably an underrepresentation. I think Stone will suggest it's probably close somewhere to 7–10%. But whatever it is, the industry is quite well represented on LGB+. And there's the breakdown there between gay, lesbian, bi, and other. And those 40 respondents that identified as trans, that make up 0.2% of the industry. And again, ONS suggests that maybe the population is 1% trans, but that they acknowledge that that is a bit of a guesstimate. And it won't be until the results from the Census 2021 are released on the 6th of January, which for the first time included questions on sexual orientation and trans. So when that data is released, we should have a much better understanding of the makeup of the UK population. A couple of other points in the corner there of interest is that 62% of the LGB+ respondents were aged 18 to 34. So there was a real concentration among the younger age groups of LGB+ respondents. And I've just highlighted some of the roles there where LGB+ people were sort of overrepresented, if you like, compared to the industry average. Digital creative, social media roles, and also marketing directors had high representation of LG+ people there. This would break down of LGB+ in C-suite positions, so at the highest tier of management. And as you can see there, we've got 7% of the LGB respondents were in C-suite positions, which is lower than the all-in average of 10% in those positions. Interestingly, the representation of trans people at C-suite was about the same as the industry average. Although I should have mentioned earlier that 40 people that responded, there should be some caution applied to when interpreting those figures, because it is below the usual threshold of response that we would report, which is 50. But we felt that 40 was still a good enough number to provide, a kind of an indication and some figures on trans representation and experience in the industry. But still interesting to see that the spread of trans people working in the industry was spread right across the levels of the industry in terms of seniority. A really important finding here, I think, was that LGBTQ+ respondents were significantly more likely to be affected by mental health conditions. So the chart on the left there refers to mental health conditions such as bipolar and depression. And as you can see, in grey is the all-in average for the whole industry. So 12% of people reported suffering from those conditions. And as you can see, they're much higher across the LGBTQ+ grouping. And on the figure on the right is stress and anxiety. Again, all of the groups, they're much higher than the industry average. So it's important, just important lessons there for companies to be aware of, I think. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the LGBTQ+ experience in the workplace and at work. And going to look at company culture first. And these are some of the findings where were most stark in terms of how the LGBTQ+ respondents differed from the all-in average. So you've got feel like they belong at their company. So LGBT+ and trans respondents were significantly less likely to feel they belong at their company. They were much less likely to see people similar to themselves in leadership positions, much more likely to feel like they were left out at work in social and work situations, and they were significantly more likely to consistently feel anxious in their job. So 47% of trans people said, yes, I feel consistently anxious in my job, compared to just 29% of the all-in average. So some key kind of experiences there around company culture. Now, the next slide is probably even more worrying in terms of experience for these individuals. Demeaning behaviour. So these are all experienced in the last 12 months at their company. Made to feel uncomfortable in the workplace. 38% of trans people and 20% of LGBT plus people said they were made to feel uncomfortable, which is again is higher than the all-in average of 14%. They're also more likely to be unfairly spoken over in meetings, and you know, most seriously and most worryingly, they were you know, more likely to be bullied or undermined in the workplace. And particularly the final point there for the trans individuals that responded, they were much more likely to have experienced sexual harassment in the last 12 months in their workplace. And I think, you know, these two slides that have highlighted the experience of these people in our industry really emphasize the importance of these actions that we're taking today to improve inclusion and you know, yeah, feelings of inclusion. Final slide is we asked a question about how likely individuals are to leave the industry due to a lack of inclusion or discrimination. And this is quite a strange finding because the LGBT plus 16% of those people said they were likely to leave the industry for those reasons, which you'd expect because they've had a more negative experience, so they're more likely than the industry average to leave the industry. Interestingly, the trans respondents, the proportion that said they were likely to leave was about the same as the industry average, even though they'd had such a negative experience. And obviously, I don't know the reasons behind that. I mean, perhaps, you know, they assume that it's not going to be any better anywhere else. That could be something that's on their mind. But I thought that was just a really interesting kind of contrast for those individuals that have identified trans, and that even though they've had such a negative experience, they're still not likely to leave. And it kind of, that runs contrary to all of the other minority groups with negative experiences that we've covered in the survey. So that was just a quick run through the key stats there. And if anyone does want more information, then they can get in touch with us at the AA and I can give you more detail on those.
Amazing, thank you. Thanks, Dan. And again, some sort of really powerful data points there, which, as with all the other actions, have shaped Action 8, which is, as a reminder, to encourage the use of pronouns in the workplace. Kate, if I could come to you first. Thanks again for joining us today. Can you just tell us, you know, what pronouns are and why this action is so important?
Yeah, no, morning everybody, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you. I'm Kate, she, her. Well, pronouns are essentially just the words that we use in everyday language to describe ourselves. So, you know, I, me, he, him, she, her, they, them, those are all pronouns. And I know that actually one of the things that people sometimes sort of mention is, oh, but they, them, is that grammatically correct? I mean, just so that everybody can feel better about it, actually the use of they, them as a singular pronoun has been around since about 1375. So, you know, it's actually okay. But they're just those little words that we use to sort of indicate, and they tend to be gendered. So they tend to refer to somebody's gender. And I think one of the things for us all to bear in mind is that largely the use of pronouns in everyday life for most people is something that really doesn't cause much of an issue or much of a problem. Where it becomes, I think, more interesting is when you are gender diverse or gender, you know, divergent, because you might not always be assigned, or that people might not always use the correct pronouns for you that you would choose for yourself. And I think that's why it's quite important that we get into the habit, if you like, of introducing our pronouns, because it's less actually about announcing who you are to the world and more about creating a space where somebody else might be able to feel a bit more comfortable. And I think that's quite an important point for us to think about. Even though it is an action that we can all take individually, actually it's more about, it's less about ourselves and more about the space that we're trying to create to welcome others.
That's brilliant. And you know, in terms of how does it work in practice, you know, what have you seen? Because I know it's something that you've supported in Publicis. How does it work in practice, and what can everyone do in order to engage beyond, you know, doing your email signature or whatever?
Well, I mean, actually, you role modelled it straight away this morning with your introduction of everybody, where you included people's pronouns. And I think
Slightly flushed up. I fluffed Yemi's, and I'm going to apologise. I was so focused on getting your surname correct, I just kind of flew over your pronoun. But yeah,
well, but I think
fine.
that, but you've also sort of hit on something that's really important, I think, for us to sort of, deal with today, which is whenever any of us make a change into engaging with something that's new, it's sometimes not always going to go right. But actually, that is the practice of allyship, is putting ourselves in a space where we might not get everything right immediately, or we might feel a bit uncomfortable. But what we're trying to do is worth it. That discomfort is negligible, really, compared to the near constant discomfort of being misgendered. So I think that's actually quite an important thing. And as you'll see, all of us, in terms of our sort of Zoom names, if you like, we've introduced our pronouns there. When you start meetings, or if you're doing speaking events, or when you meet people, you can actually say, oh, it's, hi, I'm Kate, I'm she here. You don't need to make it a big deal. It doesn't need to be something that, is very uncomfortable. It actually can become a very natural part of your everyday. And I think that's what's kind of key, really. If we can all start to introduce this and make it more of an everyday occurrence, something that we use in meetings, use with our teams, use with people when, you have somebody new joining, that actually maybe when they meet the team, everybody introduces their pronouns and allows that person to tell us theirs. Those are the kind of ways, really, that we can use them. So think of it as a way, whenever you introduce yourself or you're meeting people, that's always a good opportunity for you to introduce your pronouns.
Brilliant, that's so helpful. Thanks, Kate. Yemi, if I can come to you, and apologies again for fluffing that at the beginning of the call. It's fantastic to have you here, because obviously you, in your day job, you're working with the future talent of our industry. What do you find in your role working with them in terms of their views towards using pronouns and also inclusion more generally?
I think young people, for the most part, are just like sponges when they come to university. So they're really open to learning new things, and they really understand the importance of, I guess, having cultural competency and being able to relate to other lived experiences, and be able to share their own very authentically. It's the sort of, for a lot of people, the first time they're able to like genuinely be their most authentic self. And they really understand, how you can really just benefit from celebrating other cultures and ways of life. There is still debate, sometimes not so healthy, but that's just part of the academic experience, being able to debate and ask questions and challenge people's views and opinions. And it's, for the most part, is well-meaning. And so I think that means that it's basically been quite lovely to see how far we've really come as a college. So, pronouns at King's have become quite embedded within the academic experience. So, we have the minimal signatures, we intro in meetings, beginning of seminars. They're embedded in some of the forms that students fill out. And it is starting to become, the norm for students to start to intro their pronouns to their tutors, their lecturers, and to each other. And the students that we work with in particular, so the ambassadors and the staff, are real champions for this, and will sort of go out and, bring that culture into, for their peers. So I think it's definitely becoming much more of a norm, and it's also something that students expect from us now, to be more comfortable talking about. And I also think it's becoming like increasingly important for students, when they think about, their careers and employment, to be employed by organizations that are also, I guess, not tokenistic or, just doing lip service when it comes to inclusion. And, even if someone, who, hiring isn't LGBTQ, they're going to have a friend or a family member who is. And so they want to see organizations taking really meaningful steps to inclusion. And that usually for them equates to some level of financial support, or a really meaningful opportunity to provide, a marginalized community like genuine space to take up within the organization. So I think it's just very positive. Students really do care. They really do want to make the effort and try to understand people's experiences. And they also want to see the organizations that they want to work for, do the same thing. I think the really big thing, the big problem probably for King's at the moment, is that a lot of the inclusion work is still very much student-led, because they do really care and they do really want to make the experience most positive for students around them. And I think they want to see that continue when they go into their employment.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful for our colleagues on the call in terms of that expectation in the workplace that they go on to. I think that's a really, really big point. Yemi, how does pronoun use impact you personally as well? It'd be really good to hear your perspective.
Yes, and I think we've kind of touched on all of these things as Kate and yourself have mentioned, but it honestly has been very pivotal for me in coming out as non-binary. Being able to like hear pronouns that validate me is genuinely quite powerful, and I think for a lot of people who are like, gender identity is, like most things, just like so confusing. You don't know what's going on. You're trying to figure out who you are, even if you don't fully know like how to label yourself. Being able to like hear your pronouns genuinely is very, very validating. And I remember the first time I told someone at a party, I go by she, they, just to kind of see how it would feel. And they called me they. I burst into tears. And I hadn't even had any drinks. This was genuinely just because I really wasn't expecting the response to those pronouns before. So I think, as kind of Kate's already mentioned, you know, for people who are, you know, who are gender diverse, gender fluid, who are figuring out who they are, something as simple as being respected when it comes to pronouns does really go a long way and helps people to understand, you know, what feels right for them. And I think it's been so powerful to see it in my workplace. Like, it is really important for me to know that I'm at a workplace that will respect, even that maybe my pronouns might change during my time at the organization. Like, I started at King's as she, her, I'm now she, they. It might change to something different, and the openness that my organization has to that is really powerful. And I remember my interview at King's, the interviewers all use their pronouns, and I'd literally never seen that before in an interview. And it really did like make me think this was somewhere that maybe I could actually start to explore who I was in a work setting, as opposed to just like having this separate life outside of the workplace. So I really would just encourage you to think about the impact you might be having. Do something very, very simple that doesn't really potentially impact you massively to someone who is probably trying to figure out who they are. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mark, if I can come to you now. I can't see you on my screen. There you are. In your role as CEO of advertising, you're obviously in touch with sort of LGBTQ plus networks across the ad industry. What are you hearing from them in terms of this action? And obviously, before we introduced it as well, just what's the feedback?
Actually, this is a very live issue because advertising had an event yesterday, and I was chatting to probably our three biggest networks in Adland, which is Havas, WPP, and Publicis. And the things that are live are that their colleagues in HR are struggling with priorities, struggling with resources. Just one thing I'll throw out there, which came up yesterday, and I don't want us to kind of walk on eggshells, is actually they're kind of renaming themselves. They're not calling themselves ERGs anymore. They prefer to be networks. So that's the word that you used. So yeah. So what am I hearing? I'm hearing they are struggling with priorities and things. And what came across yesterday was really that these networks are actually playing a massive role in lots of things. And the use of pronouns is just one of them. And I'll go back to, I think we might have talked about this in the whole All In story, but what we were trying to do was trying to find that small thing that made a big difference that both Yemi and Kate have really talked about. And Yemi's own personal journey and own personal story is obviously really bringing that to life, that it's something that we can all do. And you did a great job, Sharon, at the beginning by just making it, by normalizing it and showing, look, this is what we can do. And what networks do is they are the grassroots implementation of bringing this to life. And I'm sure everybody would agree that pronoun adoption should be voluntary. And what networks do is they encourage everybody in the network to do it. And then before you know it, it's happening every day because, you know, there might be 100 people in a big network and they can bring it to life. They can obviously do the email thing, they can do the meeting thing. There's loads of things that they can do. And if there are any HR people on the call, I'm sure you've got a great relationship with your LGBTQ plus network. Make sure that you are tapping into it. And not only are they bringing it to life, but you have a very good day-to-day relationship with that network so that they can guide you and they can help you understand the journey that your organization needs to go on. So yeah, in summary, networks really powerful, and I think have a really important role to shape the future of DEI.
That's brilliant. And a question to you all, I suppose, is just, you know, in terms of sort of pushback to this action and the challenge it's presented for some organisations or individuals. I mean, is that something all three of you have come across, and what would you say to some of that?
I mean, I don't mind going first on this one, because I think, I mean, the most important thing is that when this is a voluntary action, so what we're asking people to do is to engage with something if they feel comfortable to do so. And you know, when anything is new, there's a period of learning, and for people who maybe, as I pointed out, you know, earlier, the fact that, you know, they are very rarely misgendered, if ever, right? Misgendering is not something that happens for them, so, you know, their pronouns are always used correctly. There's probably an element of like, do we really, why do we need this? But really, I suppose we all need to check ourselves and consider the fact that comes from a position of entitlement to some extent, right? Whether we mean it or not, just because, you know, that's a degree of comfort that the world affords us that it doesn't necessarily afford everyone. At the same time, we have to be really conscious of some people who are maybe questioning their gender identity and are uncertain about that, and actually using their pronouns could feel uncomfortable for them because they're not sure which pronoun to use yet, or, you know, and they don't want to be out about that. So I think it is quite a nuanced and complex thing. But I suppose what I would always say is, if you are certain of your pronouns, and if this is something that you're pretty sure about but you don't understand why, then maybe it's just about doing a bit of discovery. It is going to find out some information about the lived experiences of trans people. That's actually easier said than done in our culture at the moment, because a lot of the places that we would usually turn to for information, like our mainstream media, are actually rather skewed in terms of the coverage that they give to trans issues. And it was actually, I was at the advertising event yesterday. It was brilliant, by the way, everybody. I highly recommend it. But it was really interesting to see a panel there yesterday in terms of, you know, what is the role of brands and our industry in terms of countering hate in the media. And what was extraordinary to see was some of the hard stats about our legacy media, if you like, and the level of engagement with trans issues and trans stories, and how some of our sort of, you know, national newspapers have a section on their websites devoted to transgender. That's not transgender people, not transgender issues, transgender, a dehumanizing, you know, just dehumanizing in that way. And some of these publications have produced over 1,000 stories a month at some point during the last year, largely critical and largely filled with misinformation. And, you know, so one thing I would just point out to all of us, something we should be very alive to, is that sometimes those sources of information that we can't really rely on, we really need to be thinking about other places that we get better information. And those are largely from LGBTQ organisations, like advertising, like Stonewall, like Mermaids, like Gendered Intelligence. And so, yeah, so if you are wondering why is this necessary, maybe speak to your HR team, speak to your DEI team, speak to some of those organisations, because really, at the end of the day, all this is about is allowing people to be who they are and just respect them when they tell us who they are.
Mark, Yemi, do you want to add to that?
Actually, I was going to pick up on the question that's come up in the chat,
from Marta,
because I think that's really important, because it's to me, I'll tell you about my lived experience, which is when I see people using pronouns, I feel that I'm in that safe space that Kate has referred to. Now, I'm a gay man, and statistically, we are least prejudiced, all that kind of stuff, because we've been around for longest and we've shouted about it a lot. And we've done this, we've done the pride marches, but there's still a lot to be done. So at an advertising social a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of listening in to a chat amongst a couple of younger people, and they were, I think my takeout was, they were honestly saying that there is still so much casual homophobia, biphobia in the workplace today, and they were just discussing how they cope with it. And I was kind of saying, well, should you have to cope with it? So back to my earlier point, when I see pronouns in an email, whatever, it makes me feel there's a safe space. And Annette King, CEO of Publicis, was saying how proud they are that they've got Vive la Différence, all over the building. Sorry, Kate, I don't mean to big you up, but if I was walking into that building, I'd go, this is a safe space. Thank you.
No, that's a really good point. Yemi, did you?
I can kind of respond to your point, and also Marta's. I guess I think you can imagine in the academic setting, we're kind of dealing with the free speech wars, I guess, which will quite easily go into sort of transphobic space. And I think, as like Kate alludes to, the kind of argument I always give is, well, it's not really an argument, but this is just about we're just humans, and it's about not dehumanizing someone and having respect. And I think a lot of the time, I think also Mark has mentioned it too, it's just about safety. Am I going to feel safe in a space? And one of the easiest ways you can provide that level of feeling like this is going to be a place where I can just be safe, even before I can be accepted, is being validated for who you are. I also think the other thing I guess I would say is that in terms of the whole community, it's not just allies who get pronouns wrong and who have opinions. People within the community also have opinions and also have differing views. So I think we all have a role to play, even myself, as a person from the community, to make everyone feel welcome, even within the community. So I think it's about, ensuring that everybody is modeling these pronouns and being really supportive of a community that is very diverse and has many different experiences and barriers to feeling safe and included. But I think just safety is really the thing I take away from.
And a sense of belonging as well. So I guess that follows on to the next question, which is about, in the chat, about case studies from many companies. And you've already mentioned Publicis, getting a great shout out today, Kate. In positive case studies around promoting pronouns and the impact on LGBTQ plus employees. You've talked about it, Yemi, from your perspective with the student community at Queen's College. Are there any others we can think of? Mark, have you come across any other companies that would maybe be able to flag?
Well, yesterday it was interesting hearing from WPP, and I would actually throw the question back, because I would love to compile some learnings from people. So this group might be a good place for us to start, those who have. But what WPP were talking about was how you have to nuance the implementation of something like this on a global scale, because what's okay in the UK might not be okay in Asia, might not be okay in India and other markets, for lots of reasons. And there's some very interesting work, I've forgotten who did it, it might have been Stonewall, about ambassador, I can't remember the terminology, but there's an established model about how you implement things like this in different markets, because we have different behaviors in different markets. And what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't be triggering, we shouldn't put people in danger and all those kind of things. And there's lots of guidance in resources that will help you do that. So long answer, but it's all about nuanced application in different markets, particularly if you are a global organization.
And do you share any more questions in the chat if you have any, or hands up would be great.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I didn't mean to. I think this is a really good question, actually. Also, first of all, I mean, thank you, everybody. It's very nice that you're being so kind about Publicis, but I don't for a second imagine that we don't have a very long journey ahead of us in terms of inclusion. We're a large organisation. We benefit from the fact that everybody there is amazing and engaged with this work, but we would never sort of assume that we have anything right, or that we're lecturing anybody. We are learning and listening. That's what we do, and we have, like I said, a lot of work to do. But I think it's interesting because the adoption of this as a practice is relatively new. It's difficult actually to deliver sort of, certainly any sort of quant data for people. So it is a bit tricky to surface case studies. One thing I would say is when I worked at Stonewall, the use of pronoun introductions, which I know sounds to people like, oh my gosh, it was a largely sort of, queer organisation. And certainly like any other organisation, not without its imperfections, but it was interesting when the adoption of pronoun use there, actually that made a big difference. And that was for largely, a queer staff. And it hadn't been our normal practice up until that point. And when it did become our normal practice, that really did benefit people. It benefited people hugely. And we saw a lot more people being able to be more comfortable to be themselves. And so I can't offer any direct case studies because, as I said, I think the world is still learning how to do this. But I think in the absence of an empirical sort of case study, I would just go back to what Yemi said, which is let's listen to the people for whom this is really important and how it has such a beneficial and positive impact on their lives. And it, the impact on anybody else's is minimal in terms of, there is no negative to this. This is just a positive action.
Well, actually, and I was just going to add, because it really struck me during this call, actually, because we had a bit of a pre-call before we started at 9. And I just happened to mention that I was thinking about going back to my maiden name, which is long overdue, like many years overdue. And it has really struck me that I've had a sense of what that is, how powerful it is to, your name identifies you. And so pronouns, I absolutely get that that's kind of an additional part of how you identify to the wider world. And Mark, you said you've had a tiny taste of what it might be like to identify with pronouns, and it's just stayed with me during the call, so I thought I'd mention it, because actually I think this isn't just for the LGBTQ plus community, it is for everybody. It's another really added benefit of some of these actions in the All-In plan, is that they are supposed to improve things and impact everybody. And I think, we shouldn't really underestimate that, because even being your name being mispronounced, as I hopefully didn't do with Yemi at the beginning, is really frustrating and upsetting for some people, because it happens constantly for some. So I think we should never underestimate that, and the power of identifying people properly. And also, just to add on the case studies, I know that Bina is still taking lots of submissions for the All-In Champion status, and obviously the benefit of that certification, if you like, and that status is that we are gathering loads of, we now have 80, how many have we got now, Bina? 85 companies are now All-In Champions, which means that they've all submitted evidence that they've adopted the actions so far in their business. Now that's excluded the 3 actions, so the one that we're talking about today and another 2 that we launched in June. But everyone will have to have adopted those for submissions from January onwards, I think it is, Bina. So by sort of end of Q1, we will have a load of case studies in terms of how this has landed in businesses across the industry, including all those 85 who are already champions. So it doesn't mean that they kind of, to your point about Publicis not having got everything right, this isn't for businesses who ticked all the boxes. It's a work in progress, and we're in touch with all of them on an ongoing basis. Are there any other questions from is audience the right word for lots of black squares?
I think there's a question I can answer about mental health support. I mean, the current offering, I guess, generally is pretty poor, but I am a trustee at Mind Out, which is a LGBTQ mental health service based in Brighton and Hove. We are slowly moving national, as during the pandemic we've sort of had to go online and be able to provide that service to a larger, a group of LGBTQ people. and I can talk about Mind Out. It's a great service. We do a number of different interventions with our service users. But I think the sort of key thing I kind of wanted to say is that there's a reason why LGBTQ people generally have poorer mental health and well-being than the general population. And there are so many reasons, but I think the issue with like current health services is that not a lot of health practitioners are trained in the experience of LGBTQ people and understand, like, even just, I can relate to my experience of being Black and going to get therapy or going to a doctor and knowing that that person's not going to understand my experience. And there's an interesting stat about how LGBTQ people are, well, especially trans people, are less likely to do things like, a cervical screening, for instance, or like the very basic, like, medical procedure, because they know that they're going to go into a space where they're not understood and they're going to maybe potentially not even be safe in that environment. So I think what Mind Up does, as well as other mental health services for LGBTQ people, is provide that support so they can go to a space where they actually can feel safe, first off, and actually are going to be understood for the experiences that they have and how that might, compound what they're sort of coming to speak to. So basically, there are some great offerings in the UK, but it's definitely, there's a long way to go for us to be able to provide these services more broadly. So I guess what I would say to organisations like yourselves is that definitely don't assume that the support that you currently offer is going to be inclusive of many of your staff. A lot of them are going to need bespoke and really sort of targeted support, and it shouldn't be for them to have to ask for it and lobby for the right level of support. It'd be something that you should be proactively doing for your sort of diverse staff body.
That's great signposting. And I know also NABS, who were on the last call that we had around mental health, which is our industry's charity for wellbeing, essentially. I know they do special services and coaching as well. So we can. This is all in our hub, isn't it, Bina, in terms of support?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Catherine. Great to see you. Well, we might actually finish slightly early. Has anyone got any closing words? We've got a couple of minutes.
I mean, that's a risky offer, Sharon. Closing.
No, I was going to say, yeah. Kate, you've got 2 minutes.
Yes, I mean, for anybody who hasn't had the joy of listening to me bang on about stuff, sorry about the dysplasia of that notion. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for making the time this morning, and the Ad Association for taking a lead on this, because we talk about little big things, right? Small actions that we can all engage with daily, but that cumulatively have a really big impact. And I think it is, for me, the most important thing about this is really just listening to what Yemi said about how engaging with an action like this allows people to be themselves. And that's really all any of us want. What we want to do is to build an industry where everybody has the same opportunity to thrive, that we can do our best work, be the most creative we can be, and put positivity out in a world that really sorely needs it, if I'm honest. So yeah, for me, it's an acknowledgement of the generosity of people in finding their time here, to be here today, but just remembering, this is a way for all of us to just be that bit kinder. And I suppose, rather than ask ourselves, why don't we just get into the practice of going, why not?
That's an absolutely brilliant final word. Thank you, Kate. And a huge thanks to you and to Mark and to Yemi for your time today. It's been, just a really brilliant, huge contribution to this work, and also to Kate and Mark in terms of creating the action as well over the last year. You've just given so much of your time. So I hope it has been, insightful, informative, fun. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you about how this works within your organisations as well. If you haven't already, do get in touch with Bina about All In Champion status, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. I keep looking to you, Bina, for sort of verification, or a couple of 30th. Weeks for our 30th for our disability session as well. So I hope you can all join us again for that. But thanks again to our panel, and for all of you for coming. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.